So, Michael,
Yes.
how are you doing in quarantine?
I'm doing well. It's obviously quite hot here, which is okay. I think apparently it's going to be even hotter tomorrow, which I'm not enthusiastic about, but I'm doing well. You?
Well, I'm doing fine. I wanted to ask you because there is a Twitter account out there, which doesn't appear to be taking quarantine that well. And this is the Twitter account of Cool Cat. Remember that?
Yes, I do remember Cool Cat. Oh, this is some great movie news.
Yeah, so Tara Reid, this is 4 days ago. Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, rah! And a photo of her in her underwear, looking sexy, all of that stuff. Then, in comes Cool Cat. Now, obviously, Tara Reid captioned the photo with, hey, all you cool cats and kittens, which obviously is a reference to that woman who murdered her husband on Tiger... I nearly said Tiger Shark. Tiger King.
Yeah.
Carol Baskins. But Cool Cat, who... obviously, we don't know what Cool Cat is. He's meant to be a family-friendly cat who teaches kids about all stuff to do with, being a good citizen, an upstanding person. Yeah, growing up in America. Cool Cat replied to this pic, "Hey Tara, I'm the real Cool Cat. Raw. I'd love to be petted. Will you pet me? ?
Brilliant. Love it.
I think of Uncle, what's he called? Uncle Brian? Daddy Derek, that was it, Daddy Derek. I don't know where I got Uncle Brian from. Daddy Derek, who I think still runs this Twitter account, has lost it in quarantine by tweeting this.
Yes.
And I'm just so glad that even in the year 2020, Cool Cat can still make me laugh.
Yeah, I think they could do Cool Cat Does Quarantine. I think it'll be quite good.
Yeah, maybe don't follow his advice and tweet that, but...
Yes. Hello and welcome to Select and Reflect, the movie review podcast where we look at films that have come out in the near and distant past, we give them a couple of watches and evaluate them beyond first impressions. I'm your host Michael, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Luke, and this week we are celebrating the 20-year anniversary of American Psycho. So Luke, why don't you tell us a thing or two about American Psycho?
Sure thing, Michael. So, American Psycho is a 2000 satirical, psychological horror film, co-written and directed by Harry Mason. Fuck, it's Mary. Oh, fucking hell. I'm so used to directors being males.
I know, yeah. Wow.
It's Mary Harron. I fucking got the letters mixed up. It's my brain just immediately think, director, male. No, I don't think that's the case. I just generally think I fucked up. But anyway, directed by Mary Harron, based on Bret Easton Ellis's 1991 novel of the same name. The screenplay is by Mary Harron and Guinevere Turner, who, as you might know, Michael, are both women, which is going to be interesting. Yes. So this movie stars Christian Bale, William Dafoe, Jared Leto, Josh Lucas, Samantha Mathis, Matt Ross, Bill Sage, and Cara Seymour. It was released on April the 14th, 2000 in the United States. So yes, we're just over 20 years after the release of it. And so, Michael, can you tell me what the budget is for American Psycho?
It's not going to be too much, is it? Maybe 10 million?
You know what? That's a very good guess. I thought you may have gone a bit higher. It is 7, but you know what? I didn't expect it to be that low either, so well done. And what is the box office for American Psycho?
Oh, see, this is the kind of film I guess it maybe made a decent amount. I mean, 19 million.
Sorry, 19?
90.
Oh, 90. Oh.
That's off. Yeah, if I would have gone for 19, it would have been much better. That's what I'm picking up here.
It's a 34.
Okay, yeah.
34 million. So it made a profit, but nowhere near the amount where, it would... Well, here's the thing. It is a very significant movie. It, as it says on the Wikipedia page, it has developed a cult following, and I guess it kind of has to for it to stay relevant if it only made $34 million at the box office. But yeah, it is a very interesting movie in a lot of ways. So, Michael, did you like American Psycho?
Yes, I really liked it.
Yeah, same. I'm
getting tired of just saying I liked it. I really liked it.
I super duper liked it. That is for sure. So, Michael, how many nitpicks do you have?
See, I don't have any nitpicks, and at the risk of making you feel weird for having nitpicks, I think it's quite difficult to nitpick this film because obviously there's the unreliable narrator aspect and blah, 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 blah. But did you get any nitpicks?
Yes, so...
Okay. I'm interested to see how you squared this with the...
Yeah, well, obviously this movie is a satire. So, and as you said, it's an unreliable narrator it has an unreliable narrator from Patrick Bateman, so therefore, how do you have nitpicks? Well, I am taking the view because of things I have read from the director, Mary Harron, that what happens in the movie is not unreliable, that it actually does happen. And therefore, I am saying that there are 2 nitpicks in this movie. Yeah, just 2. So the first one is the chainsaw and the banging when that woman is being chased through the halls. Now, you may say, well, come on, that's in his head, but I don't think so. Based on what the argument I would put across if you asked me, I don't think it's in his head. I think that really happened. And you can say, well, maybe that bit didn't happen and all the rest did, but then, well, what are we doing here then? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to say, like, people would have heard the chainsaw and the banging, and you could say there's an artistic reason why nobody did, but I think that's not the case. The second one, when he shoots that old lady. Now, I don't doubt that he did imagine the part where the ATM said, "Feed me a kitten." I think he did imagine that, obviously. But he shoots the old lady. I don't think he imagines that. And then the cops, this is the nitpick, by the way, the cops get there like 5 seconds after he shoots the old lady. Literally 5 seconds after, and the cops are there. I mean, that is ridiculous, in my opinion. So yeah, those are my 2 nitpicks. And of course, it's on the premise that these things actually do happen, and they're not figments of Patrick Bateman's imagination.
Okay, yeah, see, that's interesting, because I was thinking about talking about the debate over whether or not the events of this film happened in our first section, which is this film as a horror film, because obviously if you're going to try and see it as a horror film, whether or not it's actually about a real serial killer, or it's just about some guy imagining things, it's a bit of a difference. So one would be more psychological horror, the other one would be kind of more traditional horror. My understanding was that I guess you'd say it happened interpretation. Well, I guess there's kind of 3 interpretations. It's all made up, and he didn't kill anybody. He's just crazy. Then there's obviously most of everything, which seems to be your opinion, and I'm interested in that, or your view based on what you've read in terms of what other people have said, that pretty much everything happens except for the stuff which obviously didn't happen, like, for example, the feed me a cat thing. Whereas
yes,
the
that's my position.
Because the view that I had heard, and which I found to be the most compelling, was that essentially Patrick Bateman is a killer, but because he is such a narcissist, as the film goes on, he begins to imagine himself as a more, I guess, competent and extravagant killer. So, it starts, and I think there's an argument for that within the text, which he starts off just killing some homeless guy, which is not particularly glamorous. And then by the end of it, he's getting involved in shootouts with the police. He's blowing up cars. He's killing, loads of people left, right, and center. So my understanding would be that he does kill people, but he probably just stabs homeless people. Like, I would think he's maybe just stabbing homeless people throughout the entire film, but because of his narcissism and his own sense of self-importance, he imagines it as increasingly crazy and over the top and extravagant, and he's becoming an increasingly more renowned serial killer. So what do you think about that interpretation?
Yeah, I disagree with that interpretation, because I don't think it jives in what the director has said. And because the thing is, it's obviously adapted from a book, and I haven't read the book, but apparently, I got the author of the book. I saw in an interview that I think they did with Larry King, the director and the author, in probably 2000. Yeah. That it's hard to do is bring what happened in the book onto a film, because the film, as he said, demands answers. So it's a kind of difficult thing, but I don't think you are meant to interpret Patrick Bateman as being crazy. Like, that's not the point. You're not meant to interpret him hallucinating these killings. So therefore, I mean, it could just be a crazy world that you're looking at, that we're living in, that Patrick Bateman does all this stuff, but then it's a crazy world. So if I understand what you're saying, you're kind of saying this is almost like I'm going to use the term Tim Burton-esque. I guess there's loads of other examples you could use, but basically it's almost like the universe these people inhabit is kind of almost fictional in itself. So obviously the same way in a Tim Burton universe, everyone's kind of weird and extravagant and everything's really gothic. In this universe, people, it's obviously, and obviously I'm not talking about like in a metaphysics sense, but in the universe as a reflection of the themes of the film, people are so self-absorbed and so indifferent to human suffering that while Patrick Bateman is a product of this over-the-top version of our world is an actual serial killer, people don't notice because they're also over the top. Yeah, essentially,
Okay.
it's a funhouse mirror version of the world.
I like, you know what? Yeah, okay, I like that. I think, I'm gonna say that sounds like an also quite reasonable interpretation. See, what I had heard, I'll just say what I thought I had heard from the director is that the director had more said that it was supposed to be ambiguous, that there wasn't supposed to be a clear answer, and that the issue with the film is that the film made it seem very clear that it was not supposed to be taken, or that he was supposed to be crazy. The film made loads of people think, well, obviously he's crazy, and that essentially the author and the director actually wanted it to be more open to interpretation rather than necessarily one interpretation or the other being correct. That's what I thought I had read from the director.
Okay. Well, in any sense, of course, it's fascinating to talk about, but in any sense, I think it's my concluding argument to the fact that it is real is it fits in with the theme of this movie. The theme would not be as strong if Patrick Bateman imagined it, because then, well, what's the point? What is this movie trying to say then if he's just imagining it? I think this movie, as we'll talk about in the themes later, has a pretty coherent message as what it's trying to say. And then if Patrick Bateman is imagining all this, well, then that does get undermined. And then you're just really talking about him himself and not society as a whole. But the critique is on him. It's more of a character study on him, and you're not really critiquing, like I said, society. And
we do live in a society.
And we do live in a society, and I am going to bring up the Joker later on. But yes.
Oh, well, actually, what one? So, in keeping that, I guess this is going to be obvious, but in keeping with that, you also think that when he says, "I like to cut," because here would be my one question about that, and actually, this is kind of getting into humor. So, actually, I'll just say regarding the horror thing, I've heard people say, "This is a good horror film." Blah blah blah. Like people have spoken about it as a really good horror film. I don't think this is a horror film. I think it's too artsy. It's too kind of off the wall. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you are completely right. So yeah, when I saw this was a horror film on the Wikipedia page, I was like, really? A horror movie? And it's been also described in some articles I've seen as one of the best horror movies of the 21st
century. I saw
century.
It as one of the most underrated horror movies. That's what I saw it labelled as.
I mean, it's not a traditional horror movie. You could say the message is scary, I guess, but I mean,
you can say loads of things.
Well, yeah, exactly. Then it's not. Then loads of other things which don't have people killing people with chainsaws.
That has scary messages. You could say 3 billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri is scary because it communicates the messages that justice can be elusive. You're like, oh, that's scary. Oh, what a horror film.
Yeah, and so I really didn't get that this is a horror movie. Like, you wouldn't put this on Halloween or anything like that.
No.
So yeah, in the way horror films are classed in Western cinema, no, it's not a horror movie. So,
I mean, fundamentally, it's not scary, which I guess is the thing. Like, nobody's jumping or hiding behind the sofa from Patrick Bateman.
I mean, maybe the first time you see it when he's with that chainsaw.
Yeah.
It's not really scary though. It's just kind of because he's so absurd.
I guess you could say shocking, but
but that's a better word for it. Shocking, perhaps, but yeah, it's not a horror movie, really. So yeah, what do you want to say anyway about humour?
Yeah, well, I want to say that while this film isn't a horror film, I do think it works as a dark comedy. And I was interested in what you thought about the fact, because one of the things that I thought was kind of darkly comedic is the fact that he has this habit of just saying these very graphically violent things, and everyone around doesn't acknowledge what he's saying. And the one joke, which is, of course, the one time you actually kind of really see it rubs your nose in, is when he says, I'm into murders and executions. And then the guy says, all my friends who work in mergers and acquisitions don't like it. So,
literally, Michael, that is the joke I was going to bring up.
Oh,
I mean, maybe it's a joke that everyone brings up, but it is so fucking perfect, that line. Yeah. It is such a great line, fits in with the theme, and fits in, with him just... he's trying to tell people about himself, but everybody just brushes past it, But yeah, it is a comedy. It is humorous, and you can tell that from the first scene with Patrick Bateman. And the thing about him, I'd watched this movie before, rewatching it for this review that we're going to do. But the first scene you see with him, it's clear that he is an absolute caricature of a person. And I was like, okay, how can anybody take this guy, quote unquote, seriously? But apparently, when it premiered at the Sundance Festival back in 2000, I think it was at the Sundance Festival. But anyway, nobody laughed. Nobody thought it was humorous. People didn't get that it was
too real back then.
Well, I'd say it's more real now.
I was going to say, unlike now.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's obviously a satire. When he is like having sex with those prostitutes and looking at himself and like flexing in the mirror.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just so fucking obvious. Like, how can you not get it's satirizing a particular culture that existed in the late 80s in New York and in finance capitals across the Western world? Like, that is, this fucking that is as satirical as it gets. And to not see this as a comedy is just, it blows my mind that people didn't laugh at it or didn't get it back in 2000. Things have changed now, but yeah, it is kind of crazy how people back then, people who actually watched film and are paid to critique it.
Festivals.
Yeah, who attend festivals. Like, oh god, this movie's kind of scary, it's kind of weird. He's like killing people. Oh, it's the violence. It's like, fucking hell, come on.
Yeah,
anyway, that was my reaction.
None of them found it funny. The final thing I want to say about humour is that this film has so many quotables. Like, when you just look at any video or anything on American Psycho and you go to the comment section, it's just people quoting it. Like, one of the famous lines is I have to return some videotapes, which is just such a strange thing to say. I mean, I don't know, maybe you're going to reveal there's actually some deep meaning behind I have to return some videotapes. But generally speaking, just the number of, and it's like, try getting into Dorset now, you fucking bastard. It's just so many lines which everyone knows. Like I say, everyone, lots of people know that I know. And obviously that's often, when you're talking about quotables, that's what you get in a lot of comedies.
Yeah, well, he's an absurdist character, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he's a caricature, so obviously he's going to say these weird lines. And that's the thing. Patrick Bateman, he's absurd. And being absurd is meant to be, humorous. It's meant to be funny. So yeah, obviously it's funny. Obviously it works as a comedy. There's no like laugh out loud moments apart from that mergers and acquisitions line. Yeah, it's probably the only one. But that's just because it's really clever. But yeah, I think this is really good, and it's part of the reason why you love it. Well, I love it anyway. We both love it. That's the thing. I would say maybe it's a bit too on the nose, especially at the end when they're talking about Ronald Reagan. It's like, okay, this is on the nose, but apparently looking at the reviews, it wasn't. So yeah, it is a really good satire, so it is really good at the comedy side of things, for sure. Yeah,
and also I think we both like a bit of absurdism.
Yeah, that's right up our street, I think.
Yeah, a bit of Monty Python. Yeah. We should do a Monty Python film sometime. Let's do it. But before we do that, let's talk about the themes, because we're getting into this pretty early, but that's because, I guess we've never actually addressed the fact that we haven't spoken about the plot. I don't know if you wanted to do your thing where you summarize the plot, or if we're so committed to this not really talking about the plot that you don't even feel the need to do that.
No, I will summarise the plot.
Good.
Because I have to. So
you need to.
I'm just looking, by the way, at the Wikipedia page, and there is not a plot summary.
Oh, see, that's telling, because what I was about to say is the reason why we're not really talking about the plot is because this film, the plot kind of doesn't matter. As Patrick Bateman would say, the plot doesn't matter. Like, inside doesn't matter.
Yeah,
because really the main thing about this film, obviously it's a comedy, but the big thing is its themes. It's a bit like A Serious Man in that, you shouldn't even talk about the plot at all, because really almost every single thing that happens in this film speaks in some way to the themes. And the first theme, I think, in general, my plan I came up with was to split it into themes that relate more specifically to Patrick Bateman, and then themes that relate more generally to society, although as we're going to get into, those differences are in fact elusive. But one of the things that immediately jumps out to you about Patrick Bateman in the scene with the lovely music is that he is a massive narcissist. He is obsessed with looking beautiful, with making sure that everyone knows that he gets into the best restaurants, everyone knows that he wears the best suits, etc., etc. So what do you got to say about that?
Yeah, and that is, I guess overall, if you look at the overall theme, it's a criticism of 1980s capitalist culture or yuppie culture in New York. And if you think of the movie, have you seen the movie Wall Street, by the way?
I've not seen it. I actually was planning on watching it later on this year. I had a plan to watch it for a different film.
Right.
If I would have known you were going to bring it up here, I would have watched it before.
That came out probably in 1987, and so this would be literally at the exact time that this movie is being set. And the thing with Charlie Sheen in that movie is, yes, he is a massive narcissist.
Yeah, I remember that's the scene where there's the famous speech where it's like, greed is a good thing.
Yes, yeah, by Gordon Gekko. Yeah. Who, I think, if I remember correctly, turns out to be the bad guy. I can't really remember. But yeah, Charlie Sheen in that movie, he is a narcissist. He cares a lot about, where his apartment is located. And in this movie, it's the same thing with Patrick Bateman. what does he say? What's the first thing that he says? Like, where he lives, ahead of his name. What is important is where he actually is based in New York. And obviously he gets compliments about his apartment, and he's so pissed off when Paul Allen has a better apartment than him. So pissed off. But yeah, so that's what it's all about, really. This type of culture, it's one of the very important components of that is narcissism. You care about yourself, you're just yourself, and try and acquire all these commodities that you can, that make you look as good as possible and make you feel better or make you look better than other people.
Yeah, well, I was thinking actually,
that's important. Yeah,
the narcissism obviously then does translate into the materialism, and as you kind of he obviously mentions where he lives first of all, and then the other thing is that he says when he gets over to Paul Allen's house after murdering him, he's on the verge of tears because his apartment's much nicer than Paul Allen's apartment is much nicer than his, and he's really upset about that. And obviously this happens several points during the film. He's clearly very disturbed and upset by really minor things, and of course the obvious example would be the business card scene where something else which a normal, I say a normal person, there aren't really any normal people in this film, but a normal person like you and me would think, oh, who cares about a business card? But Patrick Bateman, he's just really upset about this business card thing, and obviously that's a satire of the fact that you do get, I assume, these business folks will go to great pains to make sure they've got a perfect, tasteful business card. So obviously you get that element of materialism. Yeah, no, that business card scene is just absolutely fantastic. It is so good, and like the sweat dripping down his face when he looks at it, and like the intense, like, I think you can hear his heartbeat. Or I think so. Yeah, from memory. Yeah, it's such a perfect scene at displaying how the fuck can you care about a business card? And the first time I watched it, I was intrigued at the same time, but at another level, I was just like, what the fuck is going on here? But obviously, now watching it now, you can fully appreciate how good a scene that is. Yeah, I was going to say actually on the subject of him being obsessed over his possessions and him being obsessed over where he lives, and also him being obsessed over his physical body. It speaks to what I believe Simone de Beauvoir would call immanence as opposed to transcendence. So, are you familiar with this idea, Luke?
No, tell me.
Okay, I didn't think you would be because
I'm a fucking idiot. Is that right?
Because you don't read Simone de Beauvoir. Basically, so the idea of immanence is the idea of being physically present in a space and time. And in other words, an immanent is something which you are there and you are being interacted with. Whereas the flip side is transcendence. And transcendence is existing beyond your own physical being. In other words, having ideas that aspire into the future, or having thoughts that are grander than what can be contained within your own fleshy shell. And she uses this idea in the context of feminism, and talking about how women have generally been confined to immanence through things like childbirth and stuff like that, which is all about your physical body, whereas men have had transcendence because they've done the politicians and the philosophy and theology and all that kind of stuff. So that's just to give an example. But obviously in this film, Patrick Bateman being obsessed with where he lives, what his body's like, the clothes he puts on, it suggests a obsession with immanence, and the contrast is that he doesn't really have any sense of transcendence. And this is represented by when he says, like, there's nothing here. You might shake my hand and feel something there, but ultimately there's nothing there. And basically what it means is what he really is, at his core, is superficial and almost, in the truest sense of humanity, non-existent. Because all he is what he has and the image he presents. And there is this big kind of theme of performativity in this film, of showing who you are, rather than actually being anything meaningful.
Is that ever more displayed when he's talking to Evelyn and saying he wants to break up? Yeah. And Evelyn replies, well, we can't because your friends are my friends. So we can't do that. So, and obviously if you see previously in the movie that Patrick Bateman isn't actually friends with his friends either. So like, it's just a massive ball of fakeness. Everything's so fake. Everything is, as you say, so superficial. And obviously there is someone else who is called superficial. A politician, actually, who is called superficial. Who is that guy, Michael?
Donald Trump. No, Reagan.
Well, Trump is actually mentioned here, which is kind of ironic looking back. But yeah, Ronald Reagan is mentioned in this movie right at the end of the movie. And this is why I say, like, obviously, how can people not get it? The fact that the movie kind of, maybe not hit you over the head, like tapped you over the head with it.
Hold your hand.
Yes, when they're saying, when one of the guys, maybe McDermott, I don't know, who cares, they're all the same, literally. When he says that Reagan is so shallow, how can he just lie like that? And of course, Reagan's talking about the Iran-Contra scandal on TV, and he is the guy who defined the 1980s in America and created that culture that is being critiqued in this movie. And he is described as superficial, the phrase is there anything actually behind those eyes? I think that is what is said. So yeah, it's clearly a theme of this movie, how superficial Patrick Bateman is, and about the culture that Ronald Reagan created in the 1980s as well.
Yeah, and you also see that in terms of the morality. So obviously there's a bit where Patrick Bateman, they're at a dinner and Patrick Bateman just lists a load of issues, inner city housing and stuff like that. But
and
obviously
then he kills a homeless person in the next scene.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I was going to talk about that scene later on, which I think
that's fine.
It's a great scene as well. Yeah.
And yeah, actually, the other thing I want to bring on, just in terms of his vapidness, well, two things. This is actually interesting as it pertains to his psychopathy too, which is the fact that he just lies out of nowhere. So something I've heard about psychopathy and sociopathy is that one thing is just people will lie for absolutely no reason, not to gain anything. And you do see sometimes that Patrick Bateman seems to do that. I don't know, obviously I already mentioned this, but it was probably returning videotapes and things like that. There's no reason for him to say these things, but he just says them because they're a lie. And there are other examples where just what he says is a lie, and it's not even something which is benefiting him, but it's just because, that's what an actual psychopath would do. An actual psychopath would just lie for their own amusement or just because they feel like it. But it also communicates the more thematic aspect, which is the deceptiveness of this society and this culture that he's a part of.
So much is fake, yes.
And the final thing I wanted to bring up in terms of Patrick Bateman and what he communicates is his appreciation for popular and, you might say, somewhat vapid pop music that he then proceeds to over-intellectualize. And I was wondering what you kind of get from that thematically.
Well, yeah, it's kind of... Well, he wants to sound good, doesn't he? And you think about who he's saying it to in these situations. Yeah. It's about somebody who's completely drunk, who has not a fucking idea what he's talking about. And it's about two prostitutes who could not care less about what he's saying about fucking Whitney Houston or... Who was the other artist? He talks about Huey
Lewis and News, and he talks about Phil Collins.
Phil Collins, that's it. Phil Collins, yes.
I like, and when he says I think at two different points. So when it's with Huey Lewis and News, it's like their early work was a little too new wave for his taste, and then the other thing is with Genesis, he says they used to have this really too overly intellectual sounding music or something like that, and it's obvious these are the kind of things where if you like music that's unique and different and interesting and kind of avant-garde, then you like music that's a bit new wave and pretentious, I guess. But he's just like, I like my pop music.
It goes back to what he says before. Well, it was right at the start of the movie where he's listening to some music and he's talking to... Well, he's not really talking.
He's being talked at.
He's being talked at by his girlfriend, and he says very clearly, I want to fit in. Yeah. Very forcefully while he's listening to the music. And that's why he listens to this music. That's why he, quote unquote, likes the music, because that is what is popular. So therefore, he likes it because he, like we said before, doesn't have any humanity. He's not really there. He's just an entity. So it's popular. He likes it because he wants to fit in. And that it also, again, shows when he's talking to those prostitutes how he knows that they don't care, but he just, it's just make himself feel good. Make himself feel really important. So that scene does two things, really.
Yeah, the only other thing I can think of is that obviously a lot of the music of the 80s was quite distinctly, especially, and I think there was a big divide in the 80s between the underground music, which was of course mostly punk and things like that, but then a lot of the popular music is very kind of disco-y music, like girls just want to have fun. It's a lot of very optimistic pop music back in the 80s, I feel. And at the same time, it is kind of like Patrick Bateman saying, actually, it's communicating these really important issues about, about political strife and things like that. And yet the music itself is very inoffensive, bland, poppy music, which you could say is maybe some kind of reflection of the way that society, particularly this kind of upper class society that is very faux woke, actually treats these issues, which is, they acknowledge them as serious issues, but they present it in a lovely little package of quaint little music where they're saying, oh yeah, this is really sad, but they're not actually trying to really challenge you or grate at you in the way that more avant-garde music might. So the music and kind of the feel of the music compared to the message of the music is almost an exact reflection of the way that people in this vapid society treat moral issues.
Yeah, no, that's a very good
You could say that, couldn't you, Luke?
You could say that, yes.
Especially if you're me. But what if I told you, Luke, that as strange and crazy as Patrick Bateman is, if you lived in this society, you might, get this, mistake him for other people.
Yeah, so that is another one of the themes of the movie, which is what this culture creates is, well, everybody is similar. There is no individualism, which is kind of ironic. Everybody looks the same. They all, as Patrick Bateman says, want to fit in. They all want to have incredibly nice apartments, very similar hair, they all have glasses. And that is, of course, well, not all of them have glasses, but most of them have glasses. And that is, of course, one of the, I guess, plot threads, if you will, which is when Paul Allen is killed by Patrick Bateman. And Paul Allen, of course, doesn't think he is being killed by Patrick Bateman. He thinks it's someone else.
Yeah, Marcus something. Doesn't really matter, but... Yeah. Marcus Halberstram?
Yes, something like that. Yes, and you know, on the business card scene, of course, they all have it, the same business cards. But did you notice they're all vice presidents as well? Which
yeah. You know, actually, I think I remember someone pointing that out to in like a Reddit or something. But yes, I have heard that.
Yes, they are all vice presidents. Well, I didn't need it pointed out to me, Michael.
Yeah, because you're a hero.
I'm a fucking god at this. So they're all the same, basically, and that is one of the key themes of this movie. So it's not just about Patrick Bateman, it is about everybody around him as well.
And therefore, this film also has some things to say about society, although, as we've said, of course, everything, based on the fact that Patrick Bateman is mistaken for loads of people, that also means that every single thing we said about Patrick Bateman does equally apply to everybody else in this film. Now, Luke, I understand that you've been doing some boning up, which you love to do, to help further elucidate some of the commentary this film has about society.
Yes, I do. And I'm going to read a bit from an article by Scott Tobias, who wrote this in The Guardian, just about American Psycho in general, was his article about. And basically why I really liked it is because he said this: American Psycho is about what if the era manifested itself as a person. How would he feel? How would he behave? The conclusion is more or less the same, right there in the title. And I really like that, Michael, because that is something that I wrote down while I was watching this movie. I said it is like if this version of capitalism or this culture in the 1980s manifested itself into a person. That is what it's about. It's like, I was thinking, well, he's like the perfect person for this society. I was like, no, it is like if this society was a single person. And so I'll read on from Scott Tobias. He says, there is an idea of Patrick Bateman, he says, in the early start of the movie. Some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me, only an entity, something illusory. In Ellis's book, Bateman has a fraught relationship to his brother and soon our mother, but Harron and Turner wisely excise those characters from the film. Obviously, Michael, he has no family at all. To where he seems like someone who has no family and no past, as if he simply appeared in the world in a pinstriped Valentino couture suit. It's impossible to imagine anything like the organic process of childbirth creating a monster like Patrick Bateman. What do you think, Michael? Do you think that's correct? That it was a good decision to leave out his family?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, just making a comparison, it's a bit like the Joker, The Joker is kind of this chaotic energy, and it's more interesting. I guess I'm throwing some shade at the actual Joker film, but Joker's more interesting if he just appears out of nowhere and you don't really know where he came from. And, I guess you could say it's kind of similar energy, and I agree. Yeah, it's more... And it makes somebody feel, I guess I'm going to use this word again, it makes somebody feel ironically more transcendent if they happen to just seem to have appeared in the middle of nowhere. In the middle of somewhere, but out of nowhere. And yeah, I agree.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I also want to read another article from The Guardian, this time by someone called Irvin Welsh, who basically says that what is created in American Psycho is a savage society. It offers no easy resolutions to suburbanites, serves up no comforting knowledge that the flawed but fundamentally decent super guy is on hand to rescue them from the bad folks. There is no suggestion that either love or faith can save the day. All that remains is the impression that we have created a world devoid of compassion and empathy, a fertile breeding ground for monsters to thrive while hiding in plain sight. And so I agree that how this movie is not just a critique of Patrick Bateman, it's a critique of society as a whole. It is absolutely savage. This is what this society is. And what do you think of that?
Yeah, I get it. So basically, I mean, that's kind of the thing that does stick out about the film, where he says that there is no ultimate satisfaction. And you know what, actually, now I think about it, the fact he's saying that, obviously, in the context, is almost a bit sad, you could say, that he's like, oh, you know, no matter what happens, I'm just stuck feeling like this. I have anger, I have hatred for other people. He says, oh man, I feel like I'm having a braingasm right now, because this is just coming, I don't know what the opposite is to the wheels flying off the cart as you cross the line, but whatever the opposite to that is, that's what's happening right now, because he says, you know, I hate other people, I don't want them to succeed, I'm angry at other people, and there is no resolution. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. It reminds me of partially of a famous sermon by a Presbyterian pastor called John Ortberg, where he's talking about, the sermon's called, when the game is over, it all goes back in the box. And he's talking about learning to play Monopoly because he wanted to beat his grandmother. And he tried really hard, and he learned that the way you win the game Monopoly is you just acquire. You acquire everything everyone else has, you're ruthless of them, you drive them all off the board, and then you become the winner. And then when the game is over, it all goes back in the box. And he goes on to kind of extrapolate from that, but the ultimate point he makes, as you can imagine, is that you can win the game, you can do really well in the game, you can get all of this stuff and beat everyone else. And then what's the next step? There is the only thing you can do once you've established the only thing you care about is acquiring more and being better than everyone else, there is no resolution. So yeah, he's saying from his perspective, this psychopathy he has, this kind of loss of knowledge of reality and falling out of touch with reality and just hating other people is something which he gets no respite from. But abstracting it out to society, you talk about capitalism. I mean, what is capitalism? It's intrinsically the idea that you don't want other people to succeed. You know, if you're a capitalist, with your workers, what you're saying is, I don't want my workers to get too much money, because the more money they have, the less money I can extract through profit. You don't want your other people who run other businesses to succeed. You don't want the small guy who runs like a little independent family business to succeed, because you want your big corporation to come in there. And otherwise, capitalism is inherently about not wanting other people to succeed, wanting to fight against them. And that is kind of attitude of, I don't want other people to succeed. I don't want other people to be happy. I don't take joy in other people's happiness. And ultimately, there is no light at the end of the tunnel there. There's no sense of like, oh, finally, don't worry, I've won the capitalism. So the predicament and the horror that Patrick Bateman finds himself in at the end of the film, where he hates everyone around him, he doesn't want other people to succeed, he's only concerned about himself, and there's no way out of it, is capitalism personified.
Yeah, that is the situation he finds himself in. And you are right, he is, I guess, capitalism personified. And Irvin Welsh also, there's an extra bit of an article I want to read which kind of backs up your point. He says, Bateman would probably be held as an archetypal model of American success were it not for the fact of him being a murdering psychopath. And obviously, that's the thing. Should he be held as an American success? Of course, America, back in the 80s especially, and even still today, synonymous with capitalism. Unfortunately, it seems that it is like almost a religion in America. He also says the book directly compares the power-longing, money-grubbing tendencies of American waspish elite to mental dysfunction. Through mixing Bateman's mundane daily activities with his brutal homicides, American Psycho uncomfortably closes the gap between the psychotic cultural aspects of the United States, its wealth fixation, gun obsession, overseas militarism, increasing military fetishism at home, and that of the morbid, depressive preoccupations of the serial killer. The running metaphor is one of a culture succumbing to a materialist consumerism that destroys society by eradicating its human values in favour of an obsession with image. And that, I think, is one of the tenets of capitalism. Like, destroy society. And, obviously, I think that we can see recently how, in this coronavirus pandemic, how society can be absolutely, completely destroyed. People can just lose their jobs. I think in America there's like 36 million people.
It's gone right up.
Unemployed. Yeah, it's just absolutely staggering numbers, even compared with like the 1929 depression or the 2008 global financial crisis. But guess what? The people at the top, they're doing fine, as they always do. And I think, yes, you do make the point about how this movie is more than just a critique of society. It's a critique of capitalism as well. And I think that can be shown with the looking at the objectification of women and the lower classes as well. Because I think if you look at the losers of capitalism in this movie, or in general, I guess, not just in this movie, but women, and particularly lower class women, who are forced to do threatening and degrading work. And you can see when Patrick Bateman is in his car offering that prostitute money, like the power dynamic between the haves and the have-nots, it is kind of repellent, but at the same time, that is reality. That is the case, that we live under in capitalism. Anything to say on that, and particularly the objectification of women?
Well, obviously, I think that definitely with the lower classes, it's true. And with women as well. I mean, there is women are proportionally more likely to be impoverished than men. And I guess the other thing you could say is that certainly the Reagan years were associated with a certain machismo, and also that the kind of capitalism of that time and the spirit of capitalism of that time was very much, the acquisitiveness and the aggressiveness is something which is stereotypically more associated with men. So I definitely think, honestly, if they wanted to, do something else, they could have even had like the one woman who is a success, and she is also, fiercely misogynistic. But, I'm not saying they had to, but they could have done that, and that would have been another example of this thing. But ultimately, what they did do, they had like basically be dominated by men, and the men are.
I think if this movie was remade today, that would be the case.
Yeah.
But it's talking about, this movie is a critique of that late 1980s culture. But the thing is, why it's still holds up today is because it is also not just a critique of that culture and that society, it's also a critique of capitalism. So you could adapt this movie to today and just have, different themes involving, like a woman who is also incredibly powerful, who does what Patrick Bateman does. I want to talk about the ending a bit more, because obviously you made the comparison between the ending and capitalism, and I think it was good. And obviously the final, I guess, message of American Psycho is that there's nothing that anybody thinks is wrong about Patrick Bateman.
Yes.
And it's just like everything's fine. Let's just continue rolling along with this guy, and who's a serial killer. Yeah, he feels so weird, but he's actually not, which is again the kind of the scary part of this, if you were to call it a horror movie. But let's talk about the ending, because here's the thing. This is why, of course, one of the reasons why people thought that Patrick Bateman was dreaming it all up is because he has the conversation with the lawyer, and the lawyer says, "Hey, I met this guy, Paul Allen, who you supposedly killed in London 2 weeks ago." So
it's clear cut.
So Luke. Did he really? Yeah. So, but again, you could say, well, the lawyer, he's a guy who doesn't realise that Patrick Bateman is his client. He could just be meeting someone else who he thinks is Paul Allen in London.
Yeah.
And then what is the deal with? I forgot his name. The detective.
Oh, just call him Willem Dafoe. I honestly can't remember his name.
Yeah. So then what is the deal with the detective William Dafoe? Does he exist or not? And I think the fact that he does exist enhances the film's theme about the objectification of women, is because no one cares about all the women dying. The only person who death is investigated is the guy who is, this Wall Street banker who's obviously male and very powerful. I do think that Paul Allen was actually killed by Patrick Bateman. Of course, there's theories to say, no, he's not. It was always...
there's also some people who think like that because people are mistaken that he killed someone else instead of Paul Allen. So, which is kind of similar. I mean, I guess in one case, the lawyer is mistaking who Paul Allen is. In the other case, it would be Patrick Bateman mistaking who Paul Allen is. But
the thing is, the detective specifically is talking about Paul Allen. He mentioned Paul Allen. So, therefore, Paul Allen is dead if this detective is real. And I think it is. So, it is actually Paul Allen who was killed by Patrick Bateman. But anyway, so we've answered the question about why the lawyer thinks that what Patrick Bateman is saying is a joke. And the lawyer just doesn't care anyway, because that is the society that is lived in this world, as we just detailed. But then Patrick Bateman goes to Paul Allen's apartment, and it's been done up, and the bodies have been removed. And so the question then is, well, what's happening then? Did he actually kill people? Did he just imagine it? And are the people who were selling the home just really confused by him? But that's the thing. If you watch that scene, the people selling the home aren't really confused by Patrick Bateman. They recognise who he is. She tells Patrick Bateman to leave immediately. If you remember, it's not like, what the hell are you doing here? What are you talking about? It's like, no, leave immediately. She knows who he is. Like, he hasn't dreamt that he's killed Paul Allen. She knows that he has killed him, and he is looking for the bodies. actually, it was the bodies of the women that were in that closet, specifically Paul Allen. Yeah. So she knows that he was the one that put those bodies in there. And so why isn't she calling the police? Why didn't she call the police in the first place? Well, I read an article and it basically sums it up quite well. It's that, well, guess what? If you're trying to sell an apartment and 2 dead women are found in the closet, well, that's going to knock the price down.
Yeah.
So what's the best thing to do? Is cover it up and you make yourself more money. Again, showing the savage brutality of this society and capitalism. So again, that is a part of the theme, which is why, yes, I do think he actually did kill those women. He didn't make it up because it enhances the theme and it completely makes sense with the message that this movie is trying to portray.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. And also, I mean, the other example would be that when he's because actually, well, I'll kind of do this in a reverse order. So when the Lewis guy sees Patrick Bateman with obviously a dead body in his overnight bag, he says, "Oh, is that an overnight bag?" I mean, what is that? But look at that overnight bag. It's so beautiful. It's silk, and he's like really impressed by it. And obviously, again, so he's not even focusing on what would be quite evidently the fact that a body is being moved because, there's blood around it and things like that. Instead, he's just focusing on how nice the overnight bag is. So that would be a similar example of it showing how the People's Society blinds him. And I think the interesting thing about that actually is that Patrick Bateman is so blasé about killing people to the extent that you feel he isn't really concerned about getting caught. I mean, because on the one hand, one of the most ridiculous scenes the first time I see it, and it's one of the first indications you get he's a serial killer, is when he's showing these bed sheets to these the people at the dry cleaners, and he's saying, you can't get this out, and he's really annoyed about the fact they can't get this out, and he's not making any effort to hide the fact that he's got this big red stain on his sheets, and obviously the question could be, well, why is he not trying to hide it? Why is he just being so open about killing everyone? I think the logical answer is because he knows that in the society he can get away with these things, that ultimately him killing people and not even really trying to hide it is the equivalent to all of the corruption you see in politics where people don't even try to hide it. I mean, the fact that when you look at Reagan and the Iran-Contra affair, that thing he was doing, he wasn't trying really to hide it. Reagan was, openly presenting himself as this moral person who was going to stand up to the tyrannies of the Soviet Union while he was, taking arms from one dictatorship in order to fund another radical right-wing paramilitary death squads and things like that. And he didn't care. And people still don't care. And the entire, and obviously you mentioned the militaristic imperialism of the USA in one of your articles. And you think about the way that America does it. That there's no doubt. Like, America enters Iraq. You ask them why, they say, because Saddam Hussein was an evil dictator, and he had weapons of mass destruction. Like, well, hold on, there's loads of other evil dictators, and also there's no evidence he's got weapons of mass destruction, but they do it, and we all know why they did it. They did it because they wanted to exert their power in the Middle East. Pretty much, why has the United States intervened anywhere, and why have they not intervened in other places? It's because they want to exert their power. There is no even much of a facade of moralism to it. They're not even really pretending that they're doing these for moral reasons a lot of the time. Yes. But they just get away with it, and they just feel perfectly fine doing it, because who's going to stop them? And I felt that's kind of the same thing with Patrick Bateman, that because the delusion is so real, people are so obsessed with this materialism, that he's able to just he's dragging this body along in his overnight bag, and you can see the blood trickling out. And obviously, if you're taking the film seriously, you go, well, hold on a minute, why is he just leaving blood? That's stupid of him. But then you see, this guy doesn't even care about the blood. He's focused on the overnight bag. So yeah.
Yes. So yeah, that's true. I guess we've just summed up basically everything to do with the movie in terms of where it's set in the 1980s, and yes, all the issues with that culture. And here's the thing which I want to talk about now, how this movie relates to modern times, because this is a line from one of the Guardian articles, I can't remember which, but it says, 20 years later, American Psycho hasn't left the culture because the culture hasn't left American Psycho. And I think it's kind of the case even more so now. I think what capitalism has created, and you can look at the financial crisis, obviously I brought up the coronavirus pandemic, just incredible savageness, and still to this day we have. That's why American Psycho is still relevant, and it will continue to be relevant. But there is a twist And you mentioned it before with you would have a woman being in Patrick Bateman's place. Is that what you said? Yeah. And that is the twist now. And it's so the culture of the 1980s, of course, it's talk about objectification of women. It's all about, I think the director talked about how this movie was mocking male egos. And that was, of course, the case in the late 80s. But now things would change because that kind of male bravado that was key to the 1980s culture has gone out of fashion. And it's been replaced by kind of wokeness.
Yes.
Maybe I do hate that word because that's not originally what it was intended to mean, but that is probably the best way to describe what capitalism has morphed into today. I think of the scene where Patrick Bateman is talking to his friends and discussing all the world's problems.
Yeah.
We got to end apartheid in South Africa. I mean, that was good back in the movie came out in 2000, but it was a good critique of what was happening in 1987. But today, that critique just lands so much better because that is literally what capitalism has turned itself into. It's like, oh no, now we care about these issues like apartheid in South Africa. We're social justice advocates. That's what our business is.
Gillette, bro.
Yeah, again, a Gillette, a great example of a brand trying to market itself as being. Again, I have to use the word, but woke, and that's what capitalism has been reformed into. I think about how brands are now very concerned with their environmental impact. Trying to improve the planet, which again is not a bad thing, but again it's just it's all fake essentially. So that again lends itself to the critique which Patrick Bateman was saying in the. Let me start again. That goes back to what the discussion that Patrick Bateman was having with his friends. It's like, oh yes, all these issues which are very important, like homelessness and promote social concern, ends apartheid in South Africa, but they don't really care about any of that stuff. And I saw an article the other day about how this the world's largest science and public advocacy organization, Biotechnology Innovation Organization, has a new chief lobbyist. So you know what a lobbyist is, Michael?
Yeah. Someone who tries to get the government to do things.
Yes. So this person is called Michelle McMurray, and she'll be heading up the world's largest biotech trade association, whose members include companies that make pharmaceutical drugs, biofuels, industrial enzymes, and genetically modified crops. So all of that stuff. But do you know what she calls herself?
Power feminist. An eco-feminist.
She calls herself a social justice advocate.
Ah, lovely.
Yes. So she's also the first woman and African-American leader of BIO, a 1,000-member organization that lobbies on behalf of companies providing services or products to biotechnology companies, including drug diagnostics. Members pay flat fees. Members pay flat fees annually for bio services based on the number of employees, ranging from 3,005. That's not really necessary, actually. I should have skipped that. So, McMurray Heath is a major first in the industry. In January, Bio published its first measuring diversity in the biotech industry. It found that 11% of companies surveyed had non-white CEOs, 17% had diversity and inclusion programs in place, and 16% had women CEOs. So there you go. So now we have a black female in charge of this group, who is a social justice advocate. And that is what capitalism, again, there's no better, I think, example of what capitalism nowadays has morphed itself into. And I think there could be another version of American Psycho today that could deal with that. That doesn't deal with the 1980s sort of masculine capitalism, that, all these Wall Street bankers taking cocaine. Now, that's in the past, really. Nowadays, it's about this woman, Michelle McMurray. Michelle McMurray Heath, sorry, that's her full name. A black woman who's a social justice advocate, who's biotech's new chief lobbyist. Just incredible words. And so, I think, again, you could say that's again, the culture. It seems, American Psycho, it seems so in the past, right? But no, it's still, that's the savagery of capitalism. It's still there. It's just under a nice new friendly facade, in my opinion. So, what do you think of that?
I agree 100% that obviously there is now this desire to look more moral, look more social justice-y, look more woke. The other thing actually I find interesting about modern capitalism, which I'm sure there's got to be a good material for like a kind of John Carpenter's They Live style horror film about this, but the fact that modern day capitalism now is making it so the poorest people are becoming poorer and poorer and poorer. And yet, at the same time, capitalism relies on a robust middle class to consume in order to sustain itself. And you have this weird situation now where it's like people are no longer buying fabric softener. Or, people are no longer buying diamonds, like superficial things, which you'd only buy if you had a huge amount of disposable income. People aren't buying them anymore. And capitalists, there's something very hilariously petulant about it, that we're in a situation now where there are some capitalists, which is, say, like people who own capital, who are simultaneously trying to deprive the vast majority of people of everything they could possibly get in terms of disposable income, while also being annoyed at those people for not consuming. Think about it. We have this economy where it's like the rich people getting more and more money. And what we're being told? We're being told we need to grow the economy. We need to have a bigger economy. And a bigger economy is more people consuming. But then at the same time, there's nothing, most people don't have enough money to just mindlessly consume anymore. And I think that could be a really good material for you could have I don't know, a cannibal who's angry because the people who he's captured aren't eating. I don't know. Something like that. You could do something where it's like just to show how they're simultaneously depriving people of the ability to consume while getting angry at people for not consuming because they rely on people consuming in order to succeed. And I think that's a feature of modern capitalism which didn't exist in previous incarnations. Yeah.
So capitalism is kind of killing itself as somebody may have predicted. I can't remember who.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that is the case. So again, it's American Psycho critiquing, again, it's set out to critique this 1980s culture, and the society in which this culture existed in, and all this was manifested into Patrick Bateman. And of course, if you took, society and the culture nowadays and put it in one person, I think that Patrick Bateman would be different. Maybe he would be a woman. Maybe he'd be a different race than white. Maybe he would care more about those issues that he did at that dinner table, but he'd still be a murdering psychopath, which again is why it is still relevant to this day, American Psycho. So, Michael, even more so today, as you mentioned, the wealth inequality now is just incredible. After this pandemic, it'll be even more than it was previously, and it was already eye-bursting before. So it's just every year this movie becomes more relevant. And you consider how it was treated at the time, just this, the phrase aging like a fine wine. I don't think you could say any movie ages better than this movie, American Psycho. Every year it just ages better and better and better.
As Patrick Bateman once said, that's a very fine Chardonnay you're not drinking.
Yes. Yeah, and that is this movie. So shall we conclude, Michael? Do you want to go first? Because I talked.
All right, yeah. So this film is good. It's really good. It is very thematically dense. It gives you a lot to think about. It gives you a lot to talk about. And I think this has been one of our best discussions, if I do say so myself, one of our best discussions we've ever had on this show. And I think it is kind of a weird situation where you could say, a lot of this isn't it a bit, obvious, isn't it a bit obvious that these capitalists are materialistic and narcissistic and superficial and blah, 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 blah. And yet, I think that's interesting for two main reasons. One, it's obvious, and yet, it's obvious that this is the case. These are not kind of intelligent things to point out and that they're so obvious. And yet, people in our society are ignoring these things. I feel like there's a certain class of person who would watch this film, maybe get the thematic significance of it, and then say, oh, it's not very intelligent because anyone could point out, it's very obvious. And yet, at the same time, not realize that kind of proves the movie's point. That it's very obvious our society is like this, and yet nobody's doing anything about it. It's as obvious as Patrick Bateman with that big dead body. And also, even if you're going to say it's obvious, well, that kind of lines up with the superficiality of the film. Even if you're going to say, the themes are a bit basic, well, that's the whole point of the film, that there are these really basic things, where people are just kind of talking about them in bland, well, not necessarily bland terms, but people are talking about them in vacuous terminology, where actually what they're saying has no real significance. So honestly, even the one thing you could maybe say, it's obviously, but then that's the point. So basically, this is the second best film we've reviewed, I think. I think it's better than American Beauty. American Beauty is also a very thematically dense film, and I think maybe you're feeling it too. I think I'm feeling it. I'm possibly feeling a 10. I'm in an awkward situation with this film because I've seen this film 4 or 5 times. Like, I've seen this film enough that I should really be able to form a definite opinion on it. I guess the only question is, what do I consider to be a 10? And I think I'm gonna say I do think this film is a 10, and that's based on the fact that the themes are so dense, the way it's presented is so visceral and kind of just great. It's a perfect reification, which is a word I love to use, of this zeitgeist of the 1980s, but then also it's so relevant for today, and there's so much to talk about, so much to digest, and even if you ignore all of that, it's still a funny, entertaining black comedy. The only reason, you may notice I was attacking this, I'm not going to put it above Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, because I think Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri is also very thematically dense. I think it's got a lot going on. I think it's got a lot of really great characters. And I also think that Three Billboards has slightly more emotionality to it, and like kind of it speaks to me more on an emotional level, which I like. But I'm still going to say this is better than American Beauty. It's not as good as Three Billboards, but it is a 10 out of 10 American Psycho. So there you go.
Okay, well, I will say, Michael, that I do agree with you. It is incredibly thematically dense. The only quibble I would have is, I think we mentioned there was no plot. It's just Patrick Bateman goes around killing people. But I think you could work a plot into it to enhance the themes. I'd have to think about it. But I don't think it is necessary just to not have a plot. Maybe you disagree with that. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think that is the one issue that I would have that stops it being a 10. But here's the thing. I want to read a bit from Mary Harron, who did an interview with Vulture. She basically discusses how this movie was received, and she compares it to, because this was on the 20th anniversary, like a month ago, she did this interview. It was received like Joker was. Like Joker, people just didn't get it at the time. This is the 2019 movie, of course, starring Joaquin Phoenix. People just didn't get it at the time. People critiqued it and weren't actually looking at it properly. And she compares it, obviously, to American Psycho. And she talks about, again, how, and I should probably save this for the last discussion, but she talks about how, has the culture changed and could American Psycho be remade today? And she says, she says, because look at Joker. I don't think the culture has changed. People just had time. No, that's not true. The culture's changed to a certain extent because at the time American Psycho came out, some people dismissed it. People dismiss films that are disturbing to them, saying, oh, it's not doing anything new. Oh, we know all this. Oh, it's boring. People said that about American Psycho. Blah, blah, blah. It's boring, so familiar. It was seen very specifically as a film about the 80s, and of course it's a period film. But what happened in the 20 years since was late 20th century capitalism. Now 21st century capitalism got worse and worse, actually. Those guys didn't go away. And that is completely true. That is why this movie still holds up. That is why this movie isn't just, it's not just a critique of the 1980s. It is much more than that. Therefore, you have to give it props. Like, it ages, like I said, so well. And there is layers to this. Like you pointed out before, Michael, how the critics saying, well, all this is boring, all this is, played out, but Patrick Bateman, it's just like Patrick Bateman dragging that body. It's like, yes, everyone just looks past it. But so when this movie actually critiques people who critique it, the movie, like in a clever way, obviously, not just saying like critics are stupid, like that's what happened in that Hugh Jackman movie, The Greatest Showman. That was it. Yeah, not like that. Now, I'm not talking about that. It like actually critiques the critics in a clever way, and people don't get it, and people are confused by it. And it actually, the fact that they don't get it, confused by it, actually proves the point of the movie. It's fantastic. It is a great piece of art. Therefore, 9.5 out of 10 is the only real rating I can give it. And again, I would give it 10 if it wasn't for that slight quibble I have. They could have worked the plot in more, I think. That is something that could have enhanced the movie. And I think there's a missed opportunity, but obviously 9.5 out of 10 is still a incredibly good score. That it's probably, only one other movie has got 9.5.
And that is Lady Bird.
Yeah, you're correct. Well done. That's good memory from you.
I know, I'm a genius. I remember some of your scores I actually do remember. I don't know why I'm so good at this, but I'm just a genius. Or maybe I just go back and listen to the podcast over and over again. Just like Patrick Bateman looking at himself in the mirror. I said, that's a good podcast. Anyway.
Yes. Yes. So, Michael, that is American Psycho. What do you think we're doing next week? What are we doing next week?
Well, we're doing Cats. It needs no introduction. We're doing Cats.
Cats, yes. Another really interesting critique of capitalism.
More like catapultism.
That's great. I knew you were going to make that pun. But yeah, it should be fun. Definitely, Cats, great. So yes, thank you for listening to our review of American Psycho on Select and Reflect. We have been selecting and reflecting on it because of its 20-year anniversary, and yes, I think we are both very impressed by this movie. It just keeps getting better. Join us next week for Cats. Who have you been, Michael?
I've been Michael.
I've been Luke, and thanks for listening, and goodbye.
Goodbye.